This is Super Mario Brothers, a cheerful Italian plumber, a princess to rescue, colorful mushrooms, turtles that move slowly enough for anyone to avoid. In 1993, Hollywood looked at this property and decided it needed something more. More sweating, more tunnels, more Dennis Hopper in full reptile dictator mode, more of Hoskins, one of Britain's most respected actors, looking like he cannot believe what is actually happening to his career. I want to start with a question. How does this even happen? How do you take one of the most beloved, cheerful, universally recognized properties in the history of entertainment and turn it into a cyberpunk nightmare about dinosaur evolution and parallel dimensions? That is what we are here to find out. And the answer is more chaotic and more human than you would ever expect. By 1992, Nintendo was the most powerful name in home entertainment. The Super Nintendo was in the middle of its console war with the Sega Genesis. Super Mario World had sold over 20 million copies. Mario was not just a video game character, he was a cultural institution. Saturday morning cartoon, theatrical film deals, merchandise that rivaled even Mickey Mouse, the most recognizable fictional character on the entire planet. And this is a thing that makes a 1993 movie so fascinating as a case study. This was not a risky property. This was not an obscure game with a niche following. This was Mario, the most marketable entertainment IP in the world at the moment. The entire job was to not ruin it. That's it. Don't ruin Mario. And somehow that turned out to be completely beyond this production. The rights to adapt Super Mario Bros. Into a live action film were secured by a production company called Light Motive. Initial concept straightforward family adventure film. Simple. Tom Hanks was reportedly considered for the role of Mario. The budget was set at $40 million. The directors chosen were Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, a married couple known for their music video work and their contribution to Max Headroom. It was their second feature film. Neither had made anything at this scale ever before. Things went wrong almost immediately. Principal photography took place at a massive formal studio complex in Wilmington, North Carolina. The sets constructed there were extraordinary, elaborate, detailed, genuinely impressive. Dark tunnels, dystopian architectures, miles of industrial piping. The problem was that by the time they were built, nobody was entirely sure what movie was being made inside them. Here is a core production disaster, and I want you to understand this clearly because it explains everything that follows. The original script was a dark adult action thriller closer to Die Hard than anything Nintendo had imagined. No studio would touch it in that form. So the producers demanded a version appropriate for children. A new script arrived. The directors hated it. The actors hated it even more. And the new script bore so little relationship to the elaborate sets already constructed that nobody was sure how to use what they had built. So they improvised on the day, every day. Dennis Hopper was cast as the villain King Koopa. He was initially contracted for 5 weeks. He stayed for 17. By his own account, the production was an absolute nightmare from which there appeared to be no exit. He reportedly spent 3 hours one day shouting at the directors over a speech that had been rewritten so many times he no longer recognized it. Dennis Hopper, Easy Rider, Blue Velvet, Apocalypse Now, one of the most respected actors of his generation. 3 hours of shouting on a Super Mario set. I want you to sit with that and imagine for a moment. This is a temperature of this production. Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo played Mario and Luigi respectively, found their own way of coping. Leguizamo later wrote in his autobiography that he and Hoskins consumed whiskey throughout the shoot, knowing the film was going to be bad before it was even finished. During one scene, Leguizamo slammed on the brakes of a van too hard. The door swung shut on Hoskins' hand. It broke one of his fingers. The crew hid the brake by painting his cast pink. They taped his prop weapons to his hand, and they kept filming. A broken finger, cast painted pink, weapons taped to his hand, still filming. This is a level of commitment to a production that does not deserve it that I find genuinely impressive. Bob Hoskins did not know the film was based on a video game when he signed on to do it. His children showed him. He saw the pixelated plumber jumping around and said, and this is a real direct quote, I saw this thing jumping up and down and thought, I used to play King Lear. He used to play King Lear, and now he was filming with a taped up broken hand in a pink cast on a Mario set. I cannot tell that story without laughing and also feeling deeply sorry for him. Before the film even finished shooting, the directors were fired. CAA, the talent agency representing Morton and Jankel, removed them from the production. They were locked out of the editing room. The final cut of the Super Mario Bros. Movie was assembled without the people who directed it. What emerged from this chaos is, in its own way, genuinely remarkable, not as a Super Mario Bros. Film, as an artifact. The world of the 1993 movie is called Dinohetan, a parallel dimension where the meteor that killed the dinosaurs instead sent them into an alternate reality where they continued to evolve and eventually built a civilization. Dennis Hopper plays President Koopa, a reptilian dictator who wants to merge his dying dimension with ours. Okay, I need to pause here because I want to acknowledge something. A cyberpunk parallel dimension story with a reptilian dictator trying to merge two worlds is, on its own terms, actually an interesting concept. That's a real deal. Dennis Hopper, as a reptilian corporate dictator in a dystopian city, is generally compelling casting. The problem is that it has essentially nothing to do with Super Mario Brothers. If you strip the names Mario, Luigi, Koopa, and Toad off of this film, you have a mid tier 1990s science fiction action movie. The names are what came with 20 million fans who expected something completely different. And the gap between what the fans expected and what was on screen is total. The Goombas, mushroom headed enemies from the games who stand 6 inches tall, are reimagined as 8 foot tall, de evolved humans with tiny heads or enormous bodies. They waddle slowly. They inexplicably dance when they hear music. The Mushroom Kingdom is a cyberpunk dystopia of dripping pipes, industrial architecture, and ambient despair. The film's tagline, in a moment of genuinely unintentional honesty, was This ain't no game. They were not wrong. This ain't no game. The tagline was supposed to be exciting, and instead, it was accidentally the most truthful piece of marketing the film produced. It was not a game. It was not anything like the game. It was not anything the game's fans were expecting. And it was not anything that performed like a game adaptation was supposed to perform. The film was rated PG. It was marketed to children and families as a fun adventure based on the beloved Nintendo game. On May 28th, 1993, Super Mario Bros. Opened its theaters. It grossed $20.9 million against a $48 million budget. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars. Gene Siskel gave it 1. They both gave it thumbs down. It appeared on multiple worst films of the year lists. I want to spend a minute on what the cast said about this film afterwards because I think it's one of the most extraordinary collections of post game interviews in Hollywood history. Bob Hoskins was asked about Super Mario Brothers in three separate interviews over the years. In one, he called it the worst film he ever made. In another, his biggest disappointment. In a third, the one thing he would change about his career. Three different questions, three different answers, same movie. Dennis Hopper's response was more succinct. When his 6-year-old son Henry came to him after seeing the film and asked why he played that terrible King Koopa, Hopper explained that he did it so Henry could have shoes. Henry's response, Dad, I don't need shoes that badly. A 6-year-old, I don't need shoes that badly. That child delivered the most devastating film review of 1993, and he was in the first grade. And Hopper told that story publicly. He chose to repeat it, which tells you everything about how he felt about this film. When your own child, whose shoes you were funding with the paycheck, would have rather gone barefoot than have you make the movie, that is specific kind of professional regret. John Leguizamo, who played Luigi, has been slightly more generous over the years, calling himself and Hoskins pioneers of the video game movie genre. He is not wrong. The 1993 Super Mario Bros. Was the first feature length live action video game adaptation ever made. They had no map, they made every possible wrong turn, but then they went first. Leguizamo also noted in interviews that he and Hoskins genuinely bonded during the difficult shoot, that their relationship was real even when the film was not working, which is perhaps the most human and unexpectedly touching detail in this entire story. The marketing of the 1993 Super Mario Bros. Film is a case study in the expectation gap, the dangerous space between what a brand promises and what a product delivers. The poster featured bright colors. The trailer emphasized adventure. The merchandise, toys, books, children's clothing was aimed squarely at the same audience that played the games. Nintendo's cheerful, family friendly brand was borrowed wholesale to sell a film that was none of those things. Here is a marketing lesson at the core of the story. The film that was made, whatever its flaws, had a potential audience. It was dark, weird, cyberpunk adjacent science fiction. The audience existed in 1993. What it did not have was the audience that the marketing promised it. You cannot borrow a brand's goodwill and spend it on a completely different product. Families who brought their Nintendo loving kids to the theater expecting a colorful Mushroom Kingdom adventure left a sweaty industrial dystopia 2 hours later. They were not disappointed, they were betrayed. And betrayal is the worst emotional outcome for a brand. The expectation gap also explains why the film's actual qualities, the extraordinary set design, the genuinely interesting practical effects, some committed performances under impossible circumstances, were completely invisible to audiences. When you walk in expecting one thing and get another, you cannot evaluate what you actually got on its own terms. You can only measure it against what was promised. The 1993 film was not marketed to its actual audience. It was marketed to an audience that did not exist. People who wanted both a faithful Mario adaptation and a dark cyberpunk thriller. That combination has no constituency, and the box office reflected it precisely. Nintendo essentially never spoke about the 1993 film publicly. Mario's creator gave one of the most diplomatically cheerful statements in gaming history, saying the film may have tried to get too close to what the games were and too far from the world of the games at the same time. What he meant, in significantly more polite language, was they got everything wrong simultaneously. What Nintendo did next is the most important part of the story from a brand strategy standpoint. They locked down their intellectual property with extraordinary tightness. For 30 years, 30, Nintendo said not No to every Hollywood pitch that ever came their way. No Zelda movie, no Metroid series, no Donkey Kong anything, nothing. Because they had seen exactly what happened when they said yes and gave up creative control. One bad movie cost a franchise 30 years of cinematic potential. In 2023, Nintendo finally returned to film, this time with ironclad creative control, a partnership with Illumination, a mandate to make something that looked, sounded, and felt like the games. The 2023 Super Mario Bros. Movie grossed $1.36 billion worldwide. It became one of the highest grossing animated films ever. Same Mario, same Luigi, same Koopa, same princess. $1.3 billion versus $20 million. The difference was not the animation technology or the budget or even the cast, though all of those things mattered, right? The fundamental difference was that in 2023, Nintendo controlled their own story, every design choice, every story beat. Nothing went on screen without their approval. They learned the lesson of 1993 so completely that they sat out an entire generation of IP adaptation rather than risk repeating it. And when they came back on their own terms, they made $1 billion. The Super Mario Bros. Movie of 1993 is a failure with multiple causes: script chaos, directional conflict, production that fell apart before it finished, a cast that was drinking whiskey to cope, a lead actor who found out what the film was based on his children. But underneath all of the chaos is a single foundational mistake. Nobody involved in making this film understood or even cared about why people love the source material. Mario is cheerful, colorful, accessible. The games communicate joy, the pure, uncomplicated joy of movement and discovery and playful challenge. None of those qualities exist anywhere in the 1993 film. Nintendo understood this lesson so completely that they spent 36 years not making another film rather than risk learning it again. And when they finally came back with the 2023 film, they made something that felt like Mario, not just looked like it, felt like it. The joy was in every frame. $1.36 billion later, the lesson is complete. It took 36 years and $1 billion of evidence for Hollywood to figure out what any Mario fan could have told them for free in 1993. Bob Hoskins said the 1993 film was the worst he ever made, his biggest disappointment, the one thing he would change. Dennis Hopper's son told him he did not need shoes that badly. John Leguizamo called himself a pioneer. He was right. And Nintendo sat in a room, watched all of this play out, and made a decision that would cost them 30 years of cinematic revenue and ultimately make them billions. This is the breakdown on the Super Mario Brothers movie, the most chaotic, instructive, and genuinely strange production disaster in the history of video game adaptations. The lesson is not complicated. Know what your audience loves. Protect that feeling in whatever medium you move it to. And if someone offers you a sweaty cyberpunk tunnel in exchange for the Mushroom Kingdom, say no. I'm Nicole. This is Nicole Breakdown, and I'll see you in the next one.